Climate change and global warming is the need of the hour. But do the developing nation or the least developed nation or the vulnerable island nation have the money to actually deal with it? This is what we will be discussing about, and a new way has been found to deal with it. Hello and welcome to the Infocus series section of Drishti IAS. I am Aisha Singh, and in today's video we will be discussing about that can green debt swaps be a game changer for poor nations to go green. So we will be talking about what are green debt swaps and why are they in news. So let us first understand the timeline of the video. First we will be looking at the news, then what is the current scenario, that why this topic is in news, then what are green debt swaps and its history, then reason for debt for nature swaps, why are countries going towards it, then how can green debt swaps be enforced or encouraged, that how more and more nation can go for it. In the end, a mains practice question. This topic is of relevance from general studies paper 3, that is environment. From exam perspective, you should be able to know that what are green debt swaps and what are the reasons for its adoption. So let us see the news, and the news has been taken from the Indian Express, and it says, can debt swaps be a game changer for poor nations to go green? So we will be knowing that what are debt swap. So what is debt? See, debt is something that a country, when it takes, you can say that, see, if a country or which is a poor country or a least developed country or a vulnerable island, if they have taken some money from someone else and they are not able to pay back, so they are in a debt that they are not able to pay back. So they become or they come under debt of someone. So there is something called debt swaps, and this debt swap is what is can help the poor or the vulnerable island to come out of these debt and to repay it easily. So let us see what it is. See, what has happening is the developing nations are facing a triple whammy of rising debt. This is the first one. Second is the climate change, and third is the nature loss. So the developing countries or the vulnerable island or the least developed countries are facing these problems. First of rising debt loads, they are not able to repay what they have taken from other countries because of many reasons. And second is the climate change. Climate change is the need of the hour and every country is working towards it. But do the developing nations or the least developed nation have the resources with them to actually deal with the climate change? And third is the nature loss. We all know what has happened in the recent past, the earthquake that has occurred in Syria and Turkey, or the floods which happened in Pakistan. So are these nations which are developing, do they have the financial resources to actually deal with these kind of disasters? Then there is a financial instrument called debt for environment swaps. This debt for environment swap is a financial instrument which has been opted as that this can tackle this problem to some extent, or this would be the best way to tackle this problem for the developing nations at present. Then according to the World Bank, world's poorest countries owe 62 billion in annual debt service, a year-on-year increase of 35%. So the $62 billion is a huge amount, and this is actually more than few of the countries' GDP. So is that this amount, will the nations who are already in a phase of development, will they be able to repay this? So this becomes a very big question mark. Then question becomes that how they will be able to repay that. What are the instruments they have with themselves that they will be able to repay that or not? Then even if the financial burden is rising, the countries have to invest in climate and biodiversity protection because this is the need of the hour, and they also have to follow some international and national commitments. So even though they do not have the financial resources and they have the financial crunch, but still they have to follow these international and national commitments. So they have to even give their money to meet these climate and biodiversity protection. So let us see that what is current scenario, why this debt swap or the green debt swap is so much in news. So what has happened is Portugal and Cape Verde has sealed an agreement for a debt for nature swap last time. So these two countries, Cape de Verde is an island nation which is near the Portugal. So this, and was earlier a part of Portugal also. So these two have signed a death for nature swap, and under this Cape Verde has to pay back to Portugal, and under this death swap agreement they will be giving some of the provisions that they have to follow, which will help them in repaying the debt. Then what is thinking, and in the coming times it has been seen that countries like Ecuador, Sri Lanka, we all know, is under a lot of crisis, and Zambia will also be looking to sign these death for nature agreement or swaps. Now let us talk about that what green death swaps or death for nature swap actually is. What does they actually talk about, and why are they so much in news, and then how they can be able to help the developing countries. Then they are considered to be one way to change the terms of a country's borrowing with bilateral government lenders, development finance institutions, or private banks. So this death swap instruments deal with all these things. And then they talk about either by giving states more time to repay loans or reducing interest rates and the amounts they must pay back. So this is why this is so helpful, that under this death swap, if a country signs this, then this death swap, green death swap, helps the developing country or the country who has taken the loan from someone else. They help, and they in one way or the other try to give more time to the nation to repay the loan. And they also talk about reducing the interest rate so that not much burden is put on them. And many a times they also reduce the amount they must pay back, because they have certain kind of provisions that in some way or the other you would be able to repay them. Then they can also help the world's low income countries avoid default, because this gives the low income or the developing nations more time and less amount with less interest rate to repay back. Then this may also enable them to redeploy part of their debt repayments to invest in measures to tackle climate change, nature protection, health, or education. So if a country who has better ideas to help with the climate change or global warming, and if that country has taken loan from someone, then instead of repaying the complete loan, they can also share their views or their ideas, which might help the other nation or the creditor nation to help lower down their emissions. So this kind of exchange can also take place, and if this becomes a useful experiment, then the repayment of loan might also increase for the nation who has given the idea. So this under the green debt swap, many kind of provisions are there for the developing and the vulnerable nation, which will help them to have more time for the repayment, less interest rate, and also lessen the amount that they have to pay back. Then from the side of the creditors also this will be useful, because this can reduce the risk through additional guarantees and ensure that at least part of a loan is eventually repaid, because this will be a contract between the two nations that in some way or the other the loan would be repaid. But if this debt instrument is not fine, or this green debt swap is not fine signed between the two nations, then for creditors also this is always a danger, that whether the nation or the developing nation or the small island nation would be able to actually repay the debt or not on time. But this debt swap agreement will also provide guarantee for the creditors, and this will be a good instrument for the creditors also, as this also provides them a guarantee that yes, your loan would be repaid in this time of time and the how much interest rate, and if the amount will not be able to repaid, then in some way or the other the repayment would be done by the nation who has taken the loan. Now let us talk about its history, when it was started and what are few of the initial cases that happened. So the first death for nature swaps were agreed in the mid 1980s, mostly in the Latin America, with rich nations the main creditors. So for the first time, or initially it was started during the time of 1980s, and then again another death crisis took place in the 1990s and the early 2000s. So these are few of the initial cases of the nature death swaps. Then in the last 3 decades, environmental death swaps were rare, because in the last few years we have seen that these death swaps were not used that much, but now again they are coming back into the picture, as the countries I told you in the starting, like Zambia and Sri Lanka, who are in dire need of these kind of death swap or the nature death swap, then this is also coming back into picture. Then according to the WWF, which is Worldwide Fund, about 70-80% of countries' deaths are now owed to private creditors, and these private creditors can be in the form of bank or any kind of organization. So now if you will see, it is the private players which is coming into the picture, and most of the creditors are these private players. Now let's talk about what are the reasons for debt for nature swaps. What are the reasons that why is it actually happening? Why the country is needing these kind of debt swaps? Then the developing nations that are struggling to pay back creditors or defaulting on their debt. So these are the countries who are not able to repay or who are not able to pay back their own creditors. They are the countries who are actually in favor of these debt for nature swaps. This will provide them the buffer time. They can have the more time for the repayment. They can have lower interest rates, so that the amount that they have to repay also becomes low, and this also provides them other options also, that they can help the creditors, and which cannot invest in greening their economies and protecting their rich biodiversity. So it is the developing nation, least developed nation, or the vulnerable nations or the island nations who are not able to have their own resources, and they are not able to get that much of financial resources from on their own. So these are the countries who are actually looking for these debt for nature swaps. Then how can green debt swaps be encouraged? What can be the best way that these nature swap can be encouraged? So first and foremost being the global framework or standard. Global framework, if the global framework or standard can be maintained or can be set, then this can be a very good platform for the countries to actually feel encouraged and can opt for that. Because at present the global framework and standard, a steel frame has not been prepared, that what will be the provisions, or this will be the time date, or this can be the provisions. For example, see, whenever you go somewhere, you tend to get a brochure so that you can actually get all the terms and conditions in one place. So this is the actually the problem which is lying in this sector, that a global framework or standard has not been set till now. So if that kind of global framework would be set, which have every terms and conditions included in it, then this kind of global framework will actually promote these kind of green nature debt swaps, that the countries would be looking towards them or up to them for their own benefits. Then this will enable more creditors to join such initiatives. So a global framework or standard is required. So before moving towards the mains practice question, Drishti IAS is coming with the IAS Prelims Quick Revision Course 2023, which has started from 15th of February 2023. So this will be very beneficial for the people who are going to give their prelims in the coming few months. That is, end of May is the prelims for 2023. So you people can go for this, and this will be in a live online format. You can download the Drishti Learning app to know more about this. Now let us talk about the mains practice question. And this question is for 10 marks, which says, what are green debt swaps? I've given you a very easy one so that you can actually write about the fundamentals or the basics which you have just revised, or if you have read for the first time. Because first you should know that what exactly things are, then only you will be able to move forward. So write a very basic answer and covering all the fundamental and the basics. So first, what are green death swaps? Then why are they considered so important in today's time? So 2 points this question consists of. First is what? Second is why. So try to divide your question and write the answer in an appropriate way and do your answer writing practice. You should have the ability to actually identify what is the main aspect in the question, and then you should be able to identify this should be the introduction, or this should be the body, this should be the conclusion, or then if you have to even give the way forward in the end. So that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. Till we meet next time, keep reading and keep writing.